In 2015, scientists in England trapped 5 beavers, tested them for disease, and released them back into a struggling river. If anything went wrong, the plan was simple: remove them. But over the next 5 years, those 5 animals did something generations of human engineering had failed to do. They rebuilt a broken river system from the inside. This is the true story of how a species wiped out of England long ago became one of the country's most surprising fixes for flooding. It's also the story of why the government nearly shut the whole thing down twice. To understand why this mattered, you have to go back to a time before the problem existed. For thousands of years, the Eurasian beaver was one of the most important animals in Britain's rivers. Scientists call it a keystone species, which means it shaped the whole habitat around it. Beavers built dams across small streams and tributaries. Those dams held back water and created wide, messy wetlands full of pools, marshes, and boggy ground. This did something remarkable. The dams raised the water table and connected rivers to the flat land beside them, called the floodplain. When heavy rain came, the wetlands soaked it up and slowed it down. When drought came, that stored water kept the streams flowing. In a way, beavers acted like a giant natural sponge for the whole landscape. Water did not rush to the sea. It stayed in the valleys for weeks, soaking into the ground and feeding plants far from the banks. Then people wiped them out. Beavers were hunted for 3 things. Their thick, waterproof fur was used in expensive clothing. Their meat was eaten, and a substance from their glands called castoreum was valued for medicine and perfume. The hunting was relentless, and it went on for centuries. The exact end is debated. A historical review by the Beaver Trust from March 2023 says beavers were nearly gone across most of England and Wales by the 12th century. Gerald of Wales recorded the last confirmed sighting in Wales in 1188, but some survived far longer. At a place called Scalp Burn in Northumberland, someone found a piece of birch wood gnawed by a beaver. Dating tests placed it between 1269 and 1396. That showed beavers had held on in the Tyne River system into the 14th century. In Scotland, there are records near Loch Ness in the 1500s. And in Yorkshire, bounty payments for beaver heads were still being made as late as 1789. That is the last real trace of the native animal in Britain. After the beavers were gone, the rivers slowly fell apart. This did not happen overnight. It happened across generations, so slowly that no one really noticed. Without beavers to maintain them, the old dams collapsed, the wetlands dried out, rivers were straightened and deepened to drain farmland and make room for towns. The result was a river that behaved completely differently. Channels grew narrow, water ran faster. It rushed straight to the sea instead of spreading out and soaking in. Great Britain lost between 75% and 90% of its wetland habitats over the last 300 years. That loss made floods worse downstream and left the land less able to survive dry spells. Here is the part that is easy to miss. By the 20th century, the scientists who study how water moves, called hydrologists, were building their flood models on rivers that no longer had beavers in them. A narrow channel with fast water was simply treated as normal. Each new generation grew up seeing this damaged river and thought that was just what a river looked like. Nobody remembered the sponge that used to be there, and that slow forgetting, more than the hunting or the drainage, turned out to be the hardest thing to reverse. For centuries, that was the situation. Then, in late 2013, a retired environmental scientist named Tom Buckley was walking along the River Otter in East Devon. He noticed willow trees that had been felled and gnawed in a very particular way. He recognized the signs. Working with a local landowner named David Lawrence, Buckley set up 3 infrared motion sensor trail cameras along a stretch of river about 400 to 500 meters long. In January 2014, one camera captured a single beaver on Lawrence's dairy farm. Then, in February 2014, Buckley filmed something bigger. 3 adult beavers together, grooming, playing, and felling trees. This was the first confirmed evidence of a wild, breeding beaver population in England in centuries. The footage went to the press and drew attention from around the world. The government's reaction was fast and firm. DEFRA and the Environment Agency drew up plans to trap the beavers and remove them permanently, sending them to zoos or captive facilities. Their reasons were serious. Because no one knew where these beavers came from, officials worried they might carry a dangerous tapeworm found in parts of mainland Europe, but not in the UK. There was a second worry too. Were these native Eurasian beavers, or invasive North American beavers, which by law would have to be removed immediately? So the government had one clear answer for what should happen next: removal. A large part of the public had a very different answer. The strongest institutional opposition came from the Angling Trust. Their fear was direct. Beaver dams, they argued, would block migrating fish. The fish they worried about most were Atlantic salmon and sea trout, which swim upriver to reach the gravel beds where they spawn. And these fish were already in deep trouble. The Trust pointed to a national salmon decline of more than 80% since the 1970s. All but one English salmon river catchment was classed as at risk. On the Severn system, the recorded rod catch fell by half between 2020 and 2021. A severe collapse in salmon stocks was estimated to cost around £350 million a year. Mark Owen argued that a growing beaver population could seriously harm other wildlife by damming up watercourses and stopping fish from reaching their spawning grounds. The farmers had real concerns too. Beaver activity affected farmland drainage at 5 separate sites. The clearest case was at Nightstone Farm, where beaver dams waterlogged a field of organic potatoes. Heavy harvesting machinery could no longer reach it, and the crop was lost. The rising water also flooded a crossing point, forcing an unplanned cost of £900 for a new one, but public feeling ran strongly the other way. In 2017, a survey found that 86% supported bringing beavers back. By 2019, local support had risen to 90%. Much of that energy came from writer George Monbiot. He called the government's removal plan unjustified and irrational, arguing that fish had dealt with dams for hundreds of thousands of years. His larger point was that beavers could restore river health naturally, at no cost to taxpayers, unlike expensive government flood schemes. There was also a quieter campaign on the ground. Tom Buckley printed posters reading "Save Our Beavers" and put them in shop windows around Ottery St Mary. David Lawrence's position did not stay simple. At first supportive, he later became a critic as the population grew and spread, altering natural flow and eroding banks. Faced with all of this, DEFRA agreed to a compromise brokered by the Devon Wildlife Trust. It would pause removal and allow a proper scientific trial, but only if the animals passed strict testing. In February 2015, 5 wild beavers were trapped for testing. A veterinary team ran full genetic and health screening to ensure they were pure Eurasian beavers and disease-free. The results were clear. All 5 were pure Eurasian beavers, and tests for dangerous diseases came back negative. The animals were healthy and clean. In late March 2015, those 5 screened beavers were released back into the River Otter, officially starting the trial. What happened next changed everything. The monitoring was led by Professor Richard Brazier of the University of Exeter. His team studied the beavers across the whole 25,000-hectare catchment. Start with the fish. A survey in October 2019 counted 28 dams. Not one was built on the main channel. The dams held back just 0.3% of the river network. Then came the result almost no one predicted. Total fish numbers in beaver pools were 37% higher than in the undammed reaches. The pools had more trout and larger fish. The strongest evidence came from East Budleigh, where 52 homes had been at risk of flooding. Upstream, a beaver family built 6 dams that changed everything. Continuous flow monitoring showed storm peak flows dropped by an average of 30%, and by as much as 60% during extreme events. The dams gave the village a buffer against flash flooding. The dams also worked like a filter. Water leaving the beaver site carried a third as much suspended material, trapping over 100 tons of sediment and farm pollutants. Another unplanned win involved the water vole. In a wetland where beavers were released, the open water area grew by nearly 400%, and water voles spread into 11 new areas. On the 6th of August 2020, Environment Minister Rebecca Powell announced that the river otter beavers could stay permanently. It was a historic first for England. But the ending was not celebrated by everyone. The Angling Trust remained disappointed, citing concerns for migratory fish that were already in need of protection. Still, the idea kept spreading. Fenced projects began appearing across the country, from North Yorkshire to the South Downs. In 2022, the beaver became a protected species in England. And in March 2025, the National Trust carried out England's first legal wild release since the animal went extinct at the Purbeck Heaths Reserve. 5 beavers ended up doing something decades of human flood engineering could not. England stepped aside and let an animal older than the problem begin to fix it.